The tragedy at My Lai took place on March 16, 1968, but Americans didn't learn of it until the story was broken a year and a half later by Seymour Hersh, a 33-year-old reporter, formerly Pentagon correspondent for the Associated Press. Hersh received a Pulitzer Prize early this month for his exclusive account of the tragedy. That reportage and a good deal more background to the story are contained in his newly published book, My Lai 4. Frank McGee is an attorney from Massachusetts, defense attorney for one of the young men accused of premeditated murder at My Lai. McGee thinks Hersh should not have gotten the Pulitzer Prize. Indeed, he says the Hersh story should never have been published at all. He has filed suit against Hersh and his publisher, Random House, for $110 million each, alleging libel of his client and alleging that the Hersh book constitutes an invasion of his client's constitutionally protected right to a fair and impartial trial. Hersh and McGee talked about the issue between them for 60 Minutes cameras. My first question was to McGee.
Mr. McGee, your client is Specialist 4 William Doherty. He is charged with premeditated murder?
Right.
You think he can't get a fair trial because of what Hersh wrote?
Among other things, right. I think Hersh's book and its impending serialization in some 35 to 40 newspapers flies right in the face of the decisions of the Supreme Court of the United States in Estes versus Texas and Shepard versus Maxwell. And I'd like to know how you or your lawyers have concluded otherwise.
Now, let me ask you a question. You're concerned about pretrial publicity, correct?
Right.
What on earth, Mr. McGee, are you doing here now? Talking about this case before millions of people, and in fact, perhaps jeopardizing or abrogating the rights of other GIs to a fair trial.
I'll tell you what I'm doing here
Because
right
you're creating
now.
more of a discussion.
No, I'll tell you what I'm doing right here, right now. I've decided to do things like this because of people like President Nixon, who took it upon himself to characterize the incident as a massacre in the White House during a press conference. People like Secretary Reza, who said that this is a crime similar to those committed in Hitler's time. People like General Piers and the New York Times, and then we get down to you. You're not in that company, but you're in there. You're in the ball game, who have taken it upon yourselves to express views about what happened at My Lai.
But I think you're really missing a great issue here, and that simply is that, you know, as far as I'm concerned, the kids who did it were as much victims as the people who were shot. And I think there's something terribly important to be learned from My Lai.
Victimized by whom, to what end?
Victimized by racism from on high, given guns, 18, 19-year-old draftees, given guns, taught to kill, sent to Vietnam where they didn't understand the people. They only saw whores, beggars, thieves.
Well, how do you know this? You've never even been there.
No, but I've talked to a lot of people about it, for 5 years.
And you call that investigative reporting, relying on hearsay evidence, that kind?
Oh, pretty solid work, really. Pretty close, you know, checking minute points, dropping a lot of stuff that...
So that to you is the issue, the fact that that's the key issue.
That's as much an issue as anything else, Mike. I mean, you know, my God, you know...
The victimization.
Well, the fact that they're as much victims. One of the black kids told it to me, you know, the people didn't know what they were dying for and the guys didn't know why they were shooting them. And I think the value of that story goes far beyond any possible violation of rights of some clients. I really do.
Mr. McGee, the publication of that story brings into focus public good versus private right. What's your view?
Well, I wouldn't put it in those words. I think what you're talking about is the essential debate which has been articulated by the Supreme Court in terms of the right of the press to write in a free atmosphere as opposed to the right of accused people to have a fair trial. But more importantly, I think we've reached a real fork in the road in this country if we've got to rely upon investigative reporters here to bring people to justice.
Are you saying that those original Hersh articles about My Lai should not have been published?
I am saying flatly that's correct. And he has, as we allege in our federal court suit, and I'm just saying we alleged it now, and we hope to prove it in court, he has, with full knowledge that these men were tried, are going to be tried, deliberately invaded their right, through the publication of his book, deliberately invaded their right to a fair trial. And in 1970 in this country, we have not yet reached the point where the law enforcement machinery is going to be dependent upon news people.
What should be done then, if you will, about the statements of the President, the statements of the Secretary of the Army about My Lai?
These are statements of politicians, ill-timed. Want to play the game? This is a push and shove game, okay? If these politicians knew all they claimed to know, then they were concealing a commission of a felony, which happens to be a crime, both in federal and state courts.
And you think?
If they knew what they claimed they knew, this works both ways. They want to push and shove, we'll push and shove.
The story of My Lai should never have been made public, is what you're saying.
All right, let me add one further thing to it.
You say right.
Right.
You think it still should be held, the public still shouldn't know about what happened that day? I mean, I want to be sure that's right. You don't think there's any public right to know about that incident?
About what happened that day? You keep suggesting that you know what happened. You have never seen the log records of the Americal Division. I know you haven't. For the preceding 20 days.
You know, the sad,
all of this, these crimes, my friend. Wait a minute. No, wait a minute.
They would show nothing.
Wait a minute.
That's the sad thing.
Wait a minute.
Nothing.
These crimes involve premeditation, all right?
That's the charge, yeah.
Premeditation. So that the intent of each and every one of these accused is of the utmost importance. The intent. And so what happened in the preceding 20 days has a direct and an immediate bearing on the intent as those men jumped out of those helicopters.
Let's talk about what they did, Mr. McGee. Let me just tell you what they did. I'm describing things that are in my book. They killed people 3 ways that day. I'm talking about everybody in the company participated, but a majority did.
You missed my point.
No, I just want to tell you what they did. We're talking about let's just focus on what happened. They gathered people, perhaps 100 of them, in groups, little circles, and then some men with automatic rifle fire shot them.
Now, you don't know that of your own knowledge.
As a reporter, I know that.
Do you know that of your own knowledge?
You know, if reporters had to use everything of their own knowledge, they wouldn't get much out of a presidential news conference either.
I'm just saying you should exercise a little more caution about what you say.
Let me interject a question here, Mr. Hirsch. Did you have no concern that the men you wrote about, the soldiers at My Lai, would not be able to get a fair trial?
I had tremendous concern about it.
So why did you write the book?
Excuse me. It seemed to me that there were 2 issues going here. One was the sort of incredible tragedy that the Army itself did not report this properly and begin the procedures in such a way that it was left to a reporter, you know, with an American Express card and $5 in his pocket running around finding this story. And the second tragedy, the second terrible concern is just on point. You know, what about the rights of the individuals? And it wasn't something we took. I didn't jump with this. I talked to somebody very high in the Pentagon about this story before I wrote it. I discussed it very, very often and in detail with my lawyers. And we all agreed that the importance of this story to America far outweighed the possible damage to a number of men and officers who were going to be charged in the incident. And let me also add, it's not totally clear that they won't get a fair trial. This is not a civilian trial with the men being tried by a dozen of their peers. This is a military court-martial.
Mr. McGee, do you believe that the men who will be trying these soldiers accused of premeditated murder will be swayed by the Hirsch book?
Oh, sure. Number one, a little while ago, I said to you I have a certain confidence in the military system. You know, well, I don't mean to give that a blanket type of thing. Number one, I still believe that in the military, an accused is presumed to be guilty, and he's got to come forward and prove his innocence. And knowing very well that military generally run scared as hell when it comes to political problems, that total ball of wax, in my opinion, it raises serious questions about whether these people get a fair trial.
What you're suggesting is that these men really cannot get a fair trial from the military, that the military wants convictions, and that the military, in a sense, is in collusion with Seymour Hirsch to see that they get those convictions.
Well, what I'm saying is this. I think we have a better chance of getting a fair trial if, first of all, the trial was being held in Vietnam. Secondly, the members of the court were platoon leaders or senior NCOs with squads, okay? Guys who have been where the action is. But to tell me that we're going to sit down on the parade ground at Fort McPherson with the azaleas and the dogwoods and parade in 9 bird colonels who the last bullet they saw fired might have been in the local carnival, and tell me that they're going to bring a certain objectivity to it, I don't buy it, period.
The courts-martial of the men accused at My Lai are scheduled to begin in August. I'm Mike Wallace.
I'm Harry Reasoner. We'll be back 2 weeks from tonight on June 9th with another edition of 60 Minutes.